Call to meeting the order of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers on March 22nd, 2021. This meeting is being held in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D021 during the I'm sorry?
Sorry for the interruption. March 25.
I didn't say that?
You said March 22nd.
March 25, 2021. Because of the pandemic and because of the infeasibility and lack of prudence of meeting in our usual place, we are meeting electronically in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D.021. And we are meeting in accordance with that section and all other applicable terms of the open meeting law. Attendance and all votes will be taken by roll call. So beginning with attendance, Manager Maxwell.
Here.
Manager Hejmati.
Here.
Manager Loftus. Manager Sando.
Here.
Manager White is here. Manager Olson.
Here.
Manager Miller.
Here.
Great, thank you.
Oh, I'm here, Sherry. Sorry about that.
Oh, great, wonderful. Are there any members of the public here? Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve? Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Hejmati, second.
Thank you very much. And approving the agenda, how do you vote? Manager Hejmati?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager White, it says aye. Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda is approved. The first item of business is introduction by Mr. Dietrich of a new permitting technician.
Good evening, President White and managers. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm very happy to introduce the newest member of our permitting staff, Abby Ernst. Abby started with the district on March 8th, and rather than talk more, I'll hand it over to her to have her introduce herself.
Welcome.
Hi, President White and Board of Managers. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Abigail Ernst, but you can call me Abby. And just to give you a little bit of my background, I'm coming from the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District, where I was their permitting coordinator for the past year. Prior to that, I was in Madison, Wisconsin, completing my master's degree in water resources management. I see there were some Badger fans out there. Right. And while I was getting my master's degree, I was also working at the Wisconsin DNR doing research and monitoring. And my thesis at UW-Madison focused on sustainable chloride use on the UW-Madison campus. Like I said, I'm really excited to be here. It seems like it's a really exciting time to be joining the district, and I'm excited to be a part of the realignment of the permitting program. It's going to be great to be able to play a part in such a unique outlook for how we manage our water resources. And just from a personal perspective, I'm really excited to be, managing, the chain of lakes and Minnehaha Creek, just because they've, everyone dreams of managing those really special water resources that everyone loves. And it feels good to be playing a part in protecting something that I have a personal connection to from, when I was in Wisconsin. I'd come over here and be visiting my family and be going kayaking on Lake Harriet and walking along the creek. So it feels really cool to be playing a part in that.
That's wonderful. Welcome. Because we're meeting here electronically, but all the managers open their cameras or turn on their cameras so that we can see faces. Abby can see faces.
I was going to say welcome to Abby, but then I figured that was a polite thing to do, but it wasn't polite to boo when she said Wisconsin Badgers.
I know, that's awful.
I like to have a little bit of rivalry, so it's okay.
Okay, there are all the faces, Abby. We look forward to a time when we can meet you in person.
Yeah,
and welcome
nice
to
to
the
meet you all
district.
virtually. Thank you.
Welcome
Welcome
aboard,
to the
Abby. Welcome
Oh,
aboard.
somebody brought out their Badger shirt.
All right.
Steve Sando here. Abby, welcome aboard.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Steve, I
thank you.
hadn't counted right. On the consent agenda this evening, we have approval of the minutes of the March 11, 2021 board meeting, approval of 3 check registers, the general checking account, surety checking account, and wire transfers, and 3 resolutions. 2121 is authorization to execute a contract for the 2021 annual stormwater pond maintenance. 2122 is adoption of the revised interim maintenance protocol for the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk. And 2123 is appointment of Manager Miller as liaison to the 325 Lake Road restoration and redevelopment design process. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Point of order first,
Yes,
if I may.
yes, go ahead.
It seems to me to be appropriate for the treasurer to make the motion to approve the check registers, because it would endorse the fact that she has reviewed them and approves them and recommends them.
Great recommendation. Happy to do so. I have reviewed them closely. Staff is always quick to answer and fill me in on background information, even out of curiosity. And I think Deb and James and all the staff have a excellent grasp on our financial details, and I'm extremely appreciative of our quarterly reports that are now part of our regular meetings. So I'm happy to make that motion.
Manager Loftus has moved approval of the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller seconds. Once again, how do you vote on the consent agenda? Manager Hijmati,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Sando,
Aye.
and Manager White votes aye. Consent agenda is approved. For my president's report, I'll note that there are some meetings I've attended, and reports will come later. Commissioner Conley and Representatives Greenman and Acom. More detail to follow. The 325 liaisons, Manager Hijmati and Manager Maxwell and I attended the Hopkins City Council meeting last week when they had their listening session with HDR. And I would describe their participation as energetic and enthusiastic. I think they spent about an hour and going through the same process we had done with the listening session. And it was very gratifying to hear that. And I'd be happy to take additional comments from Manager Maxwell and Hijmati. Other observations?
No, I think it really went well. I think they really came up with, they discussed it. They had a lot of good questions. I think they all of them, all 5 were really involved in it. And that was a good point right there, that really all 5 really got engaged.
This is the one. I agree with everything that Jean said.
Great. I was happy we could attend that meeting, albeit not in person. Manager Miller, can you give us a report from the Policy and Planning Committee meeting?
This evening's Policy and Planning Committee kicked off the first phase of a 3-phase series of strategic conversations between the board and the staff. Over time, the project will be broken into 3 phases. 1 is where we've been in an organization. 2 is where we are now. And 3, what issues we see on the horizon. Lewis Smith took us through a discussion of the last 50 years and noted various projects and initiatives and policies that were noteworthy during that 50 years, and what lessons, if any, we learned in each segment of the years. The work that the committee did tonight was grounding. Lewis and James will begin writing a white paper on each of the 5 segments of our history and bringing those individual historic perspectives forward for further committee discussions and for a final work project. And it was very well presented, very informative, and everybody was fully engaged. So I really want to thank Lewis and James for the work.
I second that motion. That was a good meeting. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is listed in our agenda. We have committee and board meetings on April 8th and April 22nd, and Manager Miller is on the front line twice. He is liaison to the April 14th CAC meeting as well as being our representative at Metro Mod on April 20th. I used to say, are there other meetings or events to report on? But you know, it doesn't happen much lately. Under action items 11.1, we have resolution 2124. Mr. Beck is here to lead us through authorization to submit the LCCMR grant for updating the watershed model. Mr. Beck.
President White, thank you. I'm just going to load my presentation here. And can you see the notes view or the presentation view?
Presentation view,
Yes.
your notes are not shown to us.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, President White, Board of Managers, what I have tonight is a request for authorization to submit an application to LCCMR for the development of a two-dimensional watershed modeling tool. And so for a purpose, really the primary purpose is requesting the authorization to finalize and submit the proposal for the watershed modeling tool to LCCMR for approximately $790,000. But in addition to that, we want to provide an overview of how the LCCMR application and the watershed modeling tools that we're developing fit into Minnehaha Creek Watershed District's climate adaptation framework. And so just as an outline to ground everybody on where we're going, we want to give a background on climate history and how it's changing hydrology in the district, the climate adaptation framework that the district has developed, investments that we've made in climate change tools and that we'd like to make in future climate change adaptation tools. A brief governance scan and political scan to see how the framework is changing around us from a state and local lens. And lastly, the board request for authorization to submit the proposal to the LCCMR. So I think the 2014 flood of record really is kind of the beginning of this story. So this is what really brought flooding back into frame of mind for a lot of people. And here are just a number of statistics that really highlight the magnitude of flooding that we saw in 2014. And so, it shattered records for flow, all-time records for high water levels in several lakes and streams, and really caused a lot of problems for, whether it was citizens, businesses, or our partner cities. And so when you look at just the trends in precipitation in the state of Minnesota, you can see that 2014 isn't an outlier exactly. The amount of rain that we're getting is going up, and that's causing issues for a variety of citizens, whether businesses or government agencies. And unfortunately, future precipitation predictions suggest that it's going to get worse. And so all of this is, things that we've heard before. And what I found was interesting was the two predictions that have been the highest level of confidence by the folks that are doing these predictions are extreme. One of them is extreme rainfall. So we know that things are bad and we're getting a lot of rain now, but it's likely that we're going to get more. And so, we know we're getting more rainfall, but we also know that this has been causing pain. And so just off the top of my head, I tried to put some of the issues that, I could think of, which include flooding in the Nokomis area, Hiawatha area. We know that Edina has had flooding issues. In addition to, we operate a dam where we're front and center and trying to adapt to high water levels all the time. We know that there's landlocked basins that want to begin pumping water out during high water levels, in addition to roads in different areas that are flooding regularly in, for example, Long Lake. There's been issues in Shorewood, Painter Creek, and Zumbra that have been top of mind for a lot of people. So this isn't a localized issue exactly. It's a widespread system issue, but it's occurring at a hyper-local level. So there's local, high resolution issues, but it's happening everywhere in our district. So this really isn't one issue in any one spot. It's happening everywhere. So developing a system-wide plan is going to be critically important. And so, going back to it's raining more, that's the variable that we're trying to deal with right now, which is really difficult because when more water falls on you, that's a variable we have no control over. What we do have is a static watershed. Essentially the number of water bodies or the volume of water bodies isn't changing dramatically. We have relatively static storm sewers, and the ground beneath us isn't moving. So that's staying the same, but we're getting more water. And what is the result is more flooding. And so that's, the cascade of events that's happening and really causing these problems. So we're at this nexus between, local issues, which are the flooding issues, and precipitation falling. And those things happen on watershed boundaries. So we're really put front and center for figuring out what's going on at a system scale so we can help local communities understand and predict how to adapt to climate change. And so, what are some of the impacts of climate change? So the first thing that, we think about is what is the magnitude of the problem now? And you start realizing that there's a lot of questions that we still need to answer. So what are the areas being flooded? What's the frequency of flooding in specific areas? Is the flooding due to groundwater, out of bank flooding, or storm sewer backup? What's the maximum storage capacity of our lakes, streams, and wetlands? How much water is coming from the upper watershed, and is that going to change? What is the magnitude now, but what is the magnitude of the problem in 15, 30, 60, 90 years? So these questions are critically important to answer, and they haven't been answered concretely quite yet. We just know that there is a problem. In addition, how do we pick a strategy? Do we decide where to increase floodplain? How do we decide where to increase wetland storage, storm ponds? Should municipalities upsize storm sewer outlets to move water off the landscape faster? Do we consider how we operate Grays Bay Dam, and if that needs to be changed? Retrofitting Grays Bay Dam, moving houses out of the floodplain? There's all these really, really tough questions that are really difficult to answer, and putting them into a single framework so we can actually begin to quantitatively answer these things is going to be really important. And it has to happen at a system scale, because changing infrastructure, changing the way water moves through the district is quite expensive and difficult to do. And so we took time over the past year or so to begin building out a framework and for climate change to really try to develop that climate adaptation strategy. And so the first step of that is just understanding and predicting how climate change is impacting us now, impacting us in the future, and what we can do about it. Once you have that understanding, then you can start to begin to answer some of those questions. Not only how bad is it going to be, but how do we begin to fix it? In addition to implementing those eventually after you've convened the communities, planned, and then figured out how to actually implement those. So it's really the confluence of science, communication, and bringing everybody together to actually implement and figure out how to make our watershed much more resilient. And so if we dig into that first step, which really is the ask of the LCCMR grant, is develop that understand and predict approach. And so over the past year, we've went out and begun by just collecting continuous surface water and other variables, in addition to partnering with Hennepin County and the USGS to begin collecting other water data so we can understand how water is moving through the district. In addition, the cities and the state have collected high resolution landscape data, that's the state, and the cities have collected really high collected data on their stormwater infrastructure and put that into a digital format. And so our goal is to take all the data that not only we're collecting, but also other groups are collecting, and put that together so we can start to do short-term predictions. So how can we begin adapting to climate now, which is optimizing the way we manage the dam through machine learning, and also developing machine learning models so we can predict and communicate high water level issues to the public and emergency managers. But we also, more importantly, want to plan long-term so we can begin to change that really difficult part of climate change, which is the infrastructure, the land around us. And so bringing this all together, bringing the short-term prediction ability, but also the long-term planning, is really the two-prong approach we have for this understand and predict approach. So we've done a lot already because we've been collecting the water level and precipitation data between us and our partners to figure out the machine learning so that short-term climate change adaptation work, which includes developing a machine learning model, which really is focused on being able to take the data that we're getting and train a computer to do the predictions for short-term water level predictions, which is the graph that I put here. And that is going to allow us in the near future to be able to say, okay, if we get an inch of rainfall, this is how things are going to react, and this is the potential for flooding in certain areas. And that really gives us, that first piece of our short-term prediction of capacity. However, the bigger and harder part that we really want to be able to do is that, the long-term planning portion of that. And so the long-term planning portion of the Understand Predict is the focus of our LCCMR grant. And so, as I had mentioned before, state and regional entities are collecting soils, wetland, topography, groundwater, land cover data, whereas local entities are collecting, their own storm sewer information, future land use and infrastructure. And our best role is really being the group that can bring that all together at the watershed scale, because that's, how water flows. And so we can give groups an understanding of not only where the issues are going to be, but then also potentially based on their plans, what could be the most effective strategies to adapt to climate change. Since if a city plans for climate change, they can only think at their borders, but unfortunately, there's water coming upstream from different areas that they can't plan for, and also whatever decisions they make will impact somebody downstream. And so it's really difficult to plan for climate change at the municipal scale, whereas it's a little bit easier to do at a watershed scale. And so developing that management decision support for understanding the impacts and evaluating adaptation strategies is really a place where we're really well suited, because we're not the group collecting all the data, and we're also not the organization that is owns all the infrastructure. However, we are at the scale that is really well suited to think about precipitation and climate change. And so going back to it, that's just that first piece of our climate framework. And there is more to it, because just the science alone isn't going to get you there. Bringing everybody together once we understand and predict what's going to happen is a really critical piece, because as I mentioned before, we don't own the infrastructure. So explaining to different cities what is going to happen is going to be really, really important. In addition to getting support to actually be able to implement and then adapt moving forward. And so, this isn't a trivial amount of work, and I've outlined this a little bit before, but our goal is to submit an application to LCCMR in the near future, April 2nd. And then if we did get the funding, the LCCMR grant distribution would occur in the middle of 2022 in July. And so during that kind of period where the funding is, we're waiting for that, our plan is to develop a pilot model so that once we do get the funding, and that is the goal, is to figure out any technical kind of issues that might happen, so we can figure those out before we have to deploy the entire watershed model and figure out those at a much smaller scale. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And so if we take that pilot model, the understand and predict portion, which I have here in the middle, it really nests into that overall climate change adaptation framework, which is going to happen over a little bit longer time period. But it's really kind of the first building block to begin to move the climate adaptation framework forward. And so here's the budget that we've developed for the for the LCCMR grant. And for reference, we did apply for LCCMR funding last year for a total of 1.3 million approximately. And you can see that the amount is about $250,000 less this year. And the reason for that is because we've pushed a lot of the machine learning forward and data collection forward. So we've been able to remove that from the budget of the overall project and make sure that keeps moving, because the short-term adaptation strategy and predictions are really going to be able to help us in the near term. So we really wanted to make sure that kept moving forward. And so, we took our approach for not only climate adaptation, but also the understand and predict, and worked with or talked with a variety of national, statewide, and then also local entities. And so we wanted to understand not only if they would support the work that we're doing, but also if they understood and could reflect back to us why they valued it. And so the national or state support that we've received so far is from the USGS, so United States Geological Survey. And they really have understood our approach and really support it from the standpoint. They think that developing a system-wide or system-scale model like this is not only unique nationally, but it is going to be critical for understanding water budget and planning for climate change. But in addition to that, the Minnesota DNR, who's a leader in groundwater, and the Minnesota EQB, which is a group that really thinks about how to implement and fund a lot of this work, understand how at a state level this aligns with where the state is going with climate change adaptation. From a regional standpoint, a lot of regional agencies, for example, Hennepin County, are grappling with a variety of climate change driven issues. For example, the Hennepin County Emergency Management deployed their Mesonet precipitation gauges because they wanted to get a better sense of how much water is falling throughout Hennepin County. And pairing our water level sensors, it was a clear way to partner with a regional agency that's trying to manage water level for their purposes. In addition to the Met Council and the Minnesota City Stormwater Council really understand the regional approach to these issues. In addition, we have talked to a variety of local entities, specifically cities, City of Edina, Mound, St. Louis Park, and other cities, because they have been facing these issues, and they're really the front line and the groups that actually own the infrastructure that's being taxed by climate change. And so they really understand the value and have struggled to develop models and plan for this because a lot of times the amount of water that comes from upstream, they can't control. And so that's really the groups that are supporting us and really understand what we're doing. But we also met with legislators and state agencies and found out that for example, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is proposing $2.5 million fund for supporting communities' adaptation strategies. In addition, the University of Minnesota is developing has a bill for developing downscaled climate model output. And the purpose of that is taking climate models, which are a very coarse-grained item, and downscaling it into, I think it's a 3 square mile grid, which makes it usable for local entities. So the state understands that we need to take these resources and help communities or communities plan, because having these large scale plans isn't always, for example, using large scale climate models isn't always perfect, but downscaling it into the community level planning process is critically important. And so what we found out was not only the state is understanding how to take their resources and apply it to community level planning, but communities are understanding that they need somebody in the middle, which would, such as regional entities, to take the state resources, take the local resources, and put those together and help everybody plan for a really, really difficult situation that's affecting everybody. And so, with that, what I'm requesting today is for the Board of Managers to authorize district staff to finalize and submit a proposal to the LCCMR for 2021 funding process for an amount of $790,500 for the development of a 2D watershed modeling tool. And with that, I can take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 2124?
Hedgemati, so
Move
moved.
approval.
Thank you, Manager Hedgemati. Is there a second? Manager Hedgemati moves. Is there a second?
Loftus
Miller moves.
second.
I'll second.
I'll take Manager Loftus a second. And now, are there questions or comments for Mr. Beck?
Maxwell has one question or a couple.
Go ahead.
Is this an all or nothing grant, or do they divide it between other cities, and how many other applicants apply for it? And do we have a plan if we don't do not receive the 790?
Yeah, yes, Manager Maxwell. So it is a all or nothing grant. Either we receive, we get all the funding that we've asked for, or we don't get funded. And it depends from year to year how many applicants there are. I think it's in the hundreds. I think it was like around 150 or something last year, and I think around 70 were funded, something to that effect. But I would have to check. And we have developed a funding strategy outside of LCCMR. And one of those was the MPCA that funding mechanism that I had identified, but then there are also FEMA grants that support planning for climate change and some other grants that really would fit well, not only for this, but the next steps in the process, which would be the planning and implementation of the framework. So not only we've identified some grants that would support this if we don't get LCCMR support, but future tasks in this framework.
Thank you. Because I mean, they're all important. So, and all steps are that we're going to do are important too. So,
Thank you for your question, Manager Mackel. Are there other questions?
This is Arun.
Go ahead.
Do we have any sense of what the criteria are for LCCMR, and whether we are meeting the I'm thinking about the what they favor, what they like, some sense of what can influence them to fund us. What are the factors, either people or things, that can influence?
Manager Hebjamati, I'll take a stab at this, but I'll also maybe let James Whisker, our administrator, follow up, because he'll give a better answer than I can. We've done several things to try to understand the factors that are most important, but then also figure out what other things would make sure that we would be as competitive as possible. So we met with LCCMR staff to talk about what types of projects are most likely to get funded, and their recommendation really, one of them was a discrete tool or something that's really clear how it's going to be used, and not necessarily just studying things. And it is useful if something can be a repeatable or scalable process for the state of Minnesota. So something that's not just going to benefit one organization, it can be taken and applied elsewhere. In addition, we have met with people, commission, the LCCMR members, so that can be legislators or there's some citizens, to find out what they're interested in and what would be important to them. So not only trying to understand, what staff of the LCCMR, but also some of the members of the commission think are important. And then lastly, showing that we have support from a variety of regional, local, and state agencies that think this is really important.
Thank you. James, did you want to add anything?
Did that answer your question?
I think it did. Did you have any shading that you wanted to put on this?
Well, your main question was, what does the LCCMR really care about? What are their criteria? They're the Legislative Citizens Commission for Minnesota Resources. So in talking to their staff, while we're talking about this as a watershed planning tool and in the realm of climate adaptation, I think we're doing two things. We're leveraging community support because they're going to be on the front lines adapting their infrastructure. When we talk to the LCCMR about it, this is really a tool that's going to allow us to conduct vulnerability assessments and point out where are the impacts from a changing hydrology, and how do we need to manage our natural systems, and where can we invest in green infrastructure to protect and enhance those natural systems in the face of climate change. I mean, they're really going to be focused on outcomes for natural resources. That's some of the feedback that we've gotten. So that'll be some of the context that we'll be providing them in the application. And then, as Brian mentioned, it is a fairly political process. And so individual representatives can get a project a hearing if they want, even if it doesn't meet the initial score threshold. So just a fair amount of networking beforehand is another thing that helps get the project in front of the LCCMR for a presentation and further discussion. And we're working on sort of both of those fronts.
Excellent. Thank you. You answered the second question, is who are the people who influence it? That's a question I had too. Thank you. You're working on that, on the networking. Excellent.
Yeah, and I can get more specific during the administrator's report. President White mentioned some of the meetings that she's had with legislators in the last week or so, specifically tied to this work.
Okay, great.
Thank you for your question. Are there other questions or comments?
One comment. I wish you all the very best. You have my full support.
President White,
yes.
The only other comment that I'd make, and Brian touched on this, but I just want to underscore it and bold it, is the board should just be aware of the significance of the volume of support we have and how easy it's been to get it. I've worked on developing community support for projects and initiatives in the past, and to have the USGS invested partners like the DNR that are bringing money to the table that don't always write letters of support for legislative funding, Hennepin County commissioners, pretty much every creek community, lake communities. It's extremely significant. I think it just shows that all those agencies understand the power of the proposal and respect the value of the district's work. So whether or not that shows for the LCCMR or not, whether we get a hearing, whether it gets scored, whether it gets the funding, I think a huge take home of the whole process is in doing the outreach, I've seen the attitudes and understanding about our work and its significance at all of those scales of governance really resonate with people that we're talking to, and that will be there whether or not we get the funding. That coalition is really there and supporting the district's work. So I think that's kind of a moment, and it's exciting, and I just wanted to put extra emphasis on that for the board.
And that ties to what I was going to comment, that the letters are not boilerplate letters. Each organization has tailored their support to their own expertise or geography or their own concerns. And I think it was the USGS letter that's referred specifically to it being a tool. It's not just a bunch of numbers, it's a tool. And I thought that was quite impressive. Anything else before we vote? All right, then voting on adopting resolution 2124. Manager Hijmati.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Sando.
Aye.
Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager White votes aye. Manager Olson. Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Manager Olson.
Aye.
Thank you. The vote is unanimous. Thank you very much, Mr. Beck and Mr. Whisker. We will look forward to this with great anticipation.
Thank you.
We'll move now to item 11.2, and Ms. Domjancic-Lee will present the request for action on resolution 2125. Ms. Domjancic-Lee.
Thank you, President White and managers. I'll just share my presentation here quickly. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Tonight, under Resolution 2125, staff is seeking authorization to award contracts for alum treatments of Wassermann Lake and the Wassermann West Pond. This evening, I'll provide a brief summary of the valuable work that preceded the planned alum treatments of these water bodies, an overview of the quotes that the district received for the alum treatments, and also the expected next steps and timeline for this work. Just as a reminder for everyone, the alum applications will provide both a follow-up treatment of the Wassermann West Pond, the 6-acre pond, which is part of the Wassermann Lake Preserve Site, and also the first of 2 alum treatments for Wassermann Lake proper in the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay subwatershed. Based on the 2013 diagnostic study for the subwatershed, the internal phosphorus release rate in Wassermann Lake is 375 pounds annually, and the Wassermann West Pond exports approximately 39 pounds of phosphorus to Wassermann Lake every year. If successful, the combined treatments are projected to reduce internal loading to Wassermann Lake by an estimated 90%, for a reduction of 336 pounds per year. And this reduction positions Wassermann Lake to be removed from the state of Minnesota's impaired waters list. The drivers behind phosphorus release are the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water column and also the amount of phosphorus in lake sediments. Treatment with alum is really the best available method to bind phosphorus in lake sediments and prevent its release into the water column. So in planning for the proposed alum treatments, it was essential to have an understanding of these two drivers within the system, phosphorus amounts in the sediment and also dissolved oxygen levels. So throughout 2020, the district's research and monitoring staff gathered this critical supporting data. And this included determining both the phosphorus content and location of labile phosphorus by extracting and analyzing sediment cores from both the pond and the lake. Staff also deployed a monitoring buoy on the lake, which provided continuous dissolved oxygen and temperature readings throughout the growing season. And then this combined data was used by research and monitoring staff and Stantec, our engineer, to determine the optimum alum dosing for the pond and the lake by balancing cost and treatment area. For the Wassermann West Pond, the second dose will be more precisely calibrated and targeted because the 4 sediment cores that were taken showed specifically where and how much phosphorus remains to be treated in the pond after the second treatment, or after the first treatment rather. The analysis of the cores indicated that the first alum dose in 2019 achieved a 90% internal load reduction, and the second dose is targeted at the remaining available phosphorus below the 6-foot water depth. For Wassermann Lake, this first dose will be more conservative, which will allow us some greater flexibility with the second dose, which is planned for fall of 2022. Stantec has recommended that the treatment follow 2 distinct zones of lake depth, and that's based on the differing sediment chemistry characteristics that we found. The deeper area will receive a comparatively higher alum dose needed to inactivate the higher phosphorus content in those sediments. Following board authorization on January 28th, quotes were requested from 4 companies that perform alum applications. The district received 3 quotes for each of the applications, and those quotes are summarized here. As noted in the packet materials, the variation in the quotes is really primarily related to mobilization costs between the 3 contractors, and then some slight difference in chemical costs among the 3. Clark Aquatic Services submitted the low quotes of $107,714 for the treatment of the lake and $23,020 for the treatment of the pond. Over the last couple weeks, staff has spoken with past project references provided by Clark and also met with the project team to discuss the requirements of the treatments. And this due diligence has shown that Clark really is capable of performing the treatments to the rigorous standards that we set forth in the project specifications. I will note here also that because the quotes for the treatments are lower than what we were expecting from the engineer's estimates, the budgets, which are funded by separate Clean Water Fund grants, will allow for expansion of Stantec's construction oversight scope for the applications, and I'll bring a contract amendment for that additional oversight to the board later in April. In terms of next steps, with board authorization this evening, the contracts will be awarded to Clark Aquatic Services. And then over the next week, staff intend to work with the contractor to set a time frame for the applications and also work out details related to access to the 2 sites, traffic control and reporting. And then as a follow-up to the November community meeting, in which staff informed residents about the treatments, we'll send additional information in early April that will include the planned schedule for the treatment and a reminder of what residents can expect with the treatments. And then we anticipate that the treatments are to occur in late April or early May, and that's really depending on water temperature and site conditions. And then again, with that, staff is seeking authorization to award contracts for the Wassermann alum treatments, and I can take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 2125?
Olson, move approval.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Maxwell second.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell. Are there any questions for staff?
I do have one.
Go ahead.
Laura, does the involvement with Stantec include actually riding with them on the barge so that the exact application as plotted out by them is observed?
Manager Olson, managers, yes. Stantec staff will be on site during the applications to track the application. We also require the contractor to have a GPS system on board their craft so that they can track and then report back to us exactly where the alum has been applied. And then sort of even kind of redundantly, we'll have MCWD research and monitoring staff out on site to do some sort of complementary water quality monitoring and testing during the application, so that we're making sure that the appropriate dosage is being applied and that pH levels in the water are staying within the range as well.
All right, thank you very much.
One
Thank you. Are
other
there
quick,
other, Manager Maxwell, go ahead.
you mentioned it toward the very end, water, what the temperature of the water, just for my own curiosity, what does the water have to get to?
I believe, Manager Maxwell, managers, that the specifications require the water temperature to be above 45 degrees. And I know Brian and Kaylee are on the meeting too, so they can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially we have to have ice off and have open water conditions on the lake. We're hoping that kind of given the window that we have, that we'll be able to get on the lake prior to fishing opener, so that our use of the public boat launch isn't going to be an issue for residents of the lake.
All right, thank you. It's a
Any
learning
other
process.
Other questions?
This is Arun. I have another question.
Go ahead.
This is about the, telling the people who live around the lake and those who use the lake and so on. How have they responded to when you tell them about the fact that this alum treatment is being done? How do they respond to that?
Manager Hajmati, it's a great question. We held a public meeting via Zoom in November once we had kind of project specifications fairly set and had an idea of kind of the timing of things. And we held that meeting within the Wassermann Lake Association's fall meeting. And so we were able to reach out and be in contact with many residents around the lake and folks who use the lake for fishing, and then just some kind of curious residents as well. And the response was overwhelmingly very positive. This is something that the Lake Association has been wanting for a long time because of water quality concerns and with their lake specifically and how it's affecting the aquatic community. There has been a little bit of concern over how vegetation might respond as a result of the alum treatment, but something that we've tried to reinforce in our communications has been that although this vegetation response might increase some of the lake vegetation in the sort of near term, that essentially this treatment is helping to kind of balance the system and reduce overall algal growth and really sort of distribute vegetation across the entire lake, not in just sort of these dense, more polluted areas. And that's been received well. So generally, I think people are really looking forward to this treatment and seeing the improvements in the water quality. And I know that the district is sort of in it for the long haul also.
Thank you. Are there other questions? If not, are we ready to vote? And Manager Miller, did you wish to speak?
No.
Okay, thank you. So how do you vote on resolution 2125? Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager White? Aye. Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Hajmati?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. There's one last item. Thank you, Mr. Munch. Appreciate it very much. One last item of business here is election of a board secretary and appointment of committee assignments. We had a couple of meetings ago elected Manager Maxwell as Secretary Pro Tem because former manager Robbins had been secretary. So we need to make that have an elected board secretary. And because Manager Sando is new, we also need to make a committee assignment. Let me start with the committee assignment first. My inclination would be to place Manager Sando on planning and policy because that's where Manager Robbins had been. But I'm certainly open at this time to people's requests about where they might like to be if they'd like to move. Then I would ask for board approval for assignment of Manager Sando to Planning and Policy Committee.
Maxwell
Move
moves.
approval.
Second.
Maxwell
Second, right.
moves. I'll take Miller as a second. And we'll vote on that appointment to the committee. Manager Maxwell,
Aye.
Manager Hijmati,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Sando.
Aye.
Manager White votes aye. Manager Olson.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Manager Sando, you are on planning and policy. And then election of an officer can be done by nomination or by motion. As
Miller
you
moves
prefer.
Maxwell. Miller moves.
Miller
right
has
next.
moved to elect Manager Maxwell. Is there a second?
Second, Olson.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Any question? Manager Maxwell, this is your time to scream help for help if you want to get on with this job.
No,
Okay,
Oh, okay, read my handwriting.
we don't even care. Okay, voting for the election as Secretary of Manager Maxwell, Manager Miller,
Aye.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager White votes aye. Manager Sando,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Aye.
Manager Hijmati,
Aye.
Manager Maxwell.
Aye.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Jean, for being willing to take that job on. Our action items are done. We will now move to staff updates. Mr. Whisker.
Yes, President White, managers, thank you. In terms of administrators report tonight, it might be a little bit longer than it might ordinarily be. We've had a number of meetings. I want to talk about water levels and give everybody a status check, a pulse check on 325 Blake Road. If you've looked outside the window the last couple of days, you've noticed it's been raining. We've averaged rain from 1 to 1.5 inches across the district. Despite the rain, according to US Drought Monitor, a lot of Minnesota, including our watershed, does remain in the abnormally dry category. What we're seeing in terms of the lake, the ice around Grays Bay Dam is melting pretty fast. Staff's planning to remove the stop logs early next week and get the dam up and running operational. But given the dry conditions, we've got a 2-week forecast of dry weather and the current lake level for Minnetonka. We're not anticipating opening the dam to discharge water at this time. The lake's currently sitting at 928.9. The creek's flowing at 80 CFS due to yesterday's rain. In terms of meetings that we've been having, President White touched on a number of them. I might just add a few flavors here or there. We met with Commissioner Conley on March 17th. Commissioner Conley's, for those of you that don't know, is District 4. So she covers Nokomis, Hiawatha, the airport area, as well as her district extends up north into North Minneapolis. With Commissioner Conley, we're able to provide an introduction to the district. It's our first meeting with the commissioner since she took office, who we are, the area that we cover, what we believe and how we approach our work, as well as some examples, including our work to integrate floodplain expansion, stormwater management, and creek improvements into the Minnehaha Parkway Master Plan being led by the Park Board. And then we discussed our points of connection with Hennepin County on climate action. That all went very well. A lot of good dialogue, and Commissioner Conley asked us to loop back to her in about 60 to 90 days, set a follow-up conversation where we might dig into some of the water management issues within her district. In terms of Hennepin County, tomorrow we'll be finishing this season's slate of commissioner meetings with Commissioner Fernando. We've met Commissioner Fernando before, so we'll be focusing on just updates, talking about our work at 325 Blake Road as it relates to LRT, since she is now the chair of the Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority and focused both on Southwest and Bottineau Corridor, as well as our work on climate action. In terms of other meetings this week, we, myself, President White, staff, Joel Carlson, had an opportunity to meet with a couple of state representatives. We met with Representative Emma Greenman, who is 63B, District 63B in Minneapolis, and she was elected after Representative Wagenius retired. So she's picking up where Representative Wagenius left off in the water management topics going on in that part of her watershed. we did have a chance to introduce, it was a quick 30-minute meeting, but we did have a chance to talk about balanced urban ecology, our work in the greenway upstream that directly benefits residents in her district. And then we profiled our LCCMR ask in the context of our climate action framework. In follow-up, Representative Greenman asked for a copy of the proposal following this evening's meeting so she could take a closer look, and was also interested in following up follow-up meetings so that she could dig deeper into water management in the Nokomis-Hiawatha area. We also met with Representative Patty Acomb, who's District 44B, a former Minnetonka City Council member, now sits as Vice Chair of Climate, Energy Policy and the Finance Committee. She's also an LCCMR member. And so Representative Acomb, in addition to those assignments in her former life, sat on our Policy Advisory Committee for our comprehensive watershed management plan. So very familiar with the district, big supporter, and helped design in a lot of ways our balanced urban ecology approach and work with communities. Quite receptive to our LCCMR proposal, so we'll see if that helps us get a hearing. Shifting gears from meetings with other people, FEMA is going to be having a meeting in our district on April 15th from 1 to 3 p.m. They're going to be conducting that meeting in partnership with the Department of Natural Resources, and they're hosting a flood risk review meeting to showcase their draft data and maps for updated flood insurance rate maps and flood insurance study reports for our watershed. So it's their work, but their audience are communities related to the flood insurance rate map. So we'll be watching that meeting. We've had a couple of inquiries from communities about what those meetings are all about and our involvement. So we'll keep you posted if communities have questions and provide any follow-up there. Finally, I will shift to 325 Blake Road, and there's been a lot happening on Blake Road, and it's getting extremely exciting. I think we're building momentum and enthusiasm. Those are the common threads that I share with the board tonight. As you know, we've been working our way through the listening sessions that will serve to inform the basis of design with HDR. And so far we've had listening sessions with our board, with our key staff and advisors, with Hopkins staff and their advisors. And you will have probably seen the listening session notes from those meetings in your inbox distributed this week by Gabe. And if you haven't had a chance to read those, that's just a note that they're sitting in your inbox as a synthesis of what we've heard so far. Then on Tuesday, the 16th, President White, Manager Hejmati, Manager Maxwell, myself, Gabe, and Mike attended the city council meeting to reintroduce the project to the city council in context of the Minnehaha Creek Greenway, and then HDR led a listening session with them. And as President White and the liaisons mentioned, there's just a great deal of excitement expressed about the project by the city council, full engagement. Some of the things that I heard that weren't mentioned earlier, loud and clear from the city, is that they see this not just as a development on 12 acres in the city, but as part of regional patterns in nature relative to our greenway, transit, and development, just with the context of our greenway, the new transit station, LRT, the trail, a new road, a new park, and just the vibrance of the existing local business community. So those are good notes. They also see the site not defined by the development, which I thought was interesting. They're very interested in the development, but as they talked about their mental map for the site, it was all about the vibrance of this place. And they talked a lot about how it needed to be activated by people. And it's not just about the building. And it's also not just about the people who live on site, but the broader community's access to this amazing place in the community. So they spent a lot of time discussing the site being a destination rather than a corridor you pass through. They described how the site could activate this whole district on the east side of town and could complement downtown. So all in all, I thought it was a really energizing meeting for the district to attend and listen to the council's vision. They seemed fully plugged in. Building off of that one, there'll be a final listening session that's going to take place on March 31st next week with the community. That meeting's been promoted through website, direct mailers, survey that we've pushed, along with our promotional video. flyers in the community, a recent Sun Sailor article. And the survey seems to be landing. From what I hear from staff, we've got over 50 responses so far, about 27 to 30 RSVPs. And we're hearing from the business community, community groups, and just residents. A lot of the comments that we're getting in from the survey so far really seem to be focused in on green space and trails. So right in our wheelhouse with what we're trying to accomplish. And so notes from that city council meeting and the community meetings, the synthesis from those will be next in your inbox after those meetings are complete from HDR. So you've got 2 in there and you're going to get a few more coming. Separate from those listening sessions, as part of our ongoing engagement strategy and just effort to build excitement, staff met with representatives of Met Council, the county, and Three Rivers Park District all together in one digital room. And again, just tons of excitement from people that have never heard about the project and folks that have been around a very long time. All talked about their proactive engagement in the site. All expressed a level of excitement from their own perspective and offered advice. We heard from Hennepin County about their perspectives on affordable housing and deeply affordable programming that they have and advice that they can provide. Three Rivers spoke about their interest in developing park programming in the inner ring suburbs, and they're really interested in having their programmers engaged in our design, thinking about designing the space in a way that's conducive to it being programmed in the future to really activate it. So that was interesting, is beyond having residents on the site or people moving through corridors, is having partners that are interested in using the space when it's built as part of the Greenway. Met Council, obviously they've got a housing and placemaking, tax-based revitalization interests. But one new thing that we heard is their perspective on the site's potential as a demonstration for renewable energy. They spent some time talking about geothermal and their solar programs. And it sounds like they've done quite a bit of work on how those types of programs benefit the bottom line of developers. So they've got some sort of pro forma information about that, and they provide financial incentives for renewable energy. So that's something that they're interested in connecting to the project. All of them are really willing to champion the project through their outreach channels too, just very excited and want to talk about the project and celebrate the site. That's a little bit on the design side. On the development side, as you know, the request for proposals are out to our 5 developers that were shortlisted by the board. That process will remain open for about 6 more weeks. And of course, between now and then, with the engagement and the listening sessions coming to a close, and this 6-week period between the RFPs being out and developers submitting, the design team's now transitioning into scenario planning. So they're going to start sketching out elements of the vision that we've heard from all of the listening sessions, which is extremely exciting. So tons of work being done on the project by both the board and staff. We appreciate everybody's time and effort. I think, again, take home is the enthusiasm level remains high, not just inside the organization, but out in the community with all of our partners. And we're trying to keep the information flowing on this. If you've got suggestions on how to do that better, let us know. You're going to keep receiving email updates, but if you've got any questions, you know where we are. So reach out anytime to Gabe or Mike if you have questions, you want a sort of custom tailored update, or if you've just got thoughts about the work. I know that's a lot, but it's a lot and it's a big project. So I wanted to keep the information coming your way. And with that, I will conclude the admin report and see if there's questions from the board about anything I mentioned or anything off topic.
Thank you, James. Go ahead.
Miller here.
Go ahead.
James, how are you going to facilitate the interface between the Metro Council and their environmental initiatives in the county in their low-income housing initiatives and each individual developer, so that all the developers all have access to these other resources that they may or may not know about?
Right. I don't know. That was the focus of the meeting, to be quite honest, is to reintroduce the project to those teams. understand on their terms, what are their interests, what goals can this site achieve for their programs and their policies, and they're very clear in that. And then to figure out how are they going to proactively engage in a way that's actually manageable, because there's to your question, there's a lot of players and it could get noisy. And so I think the idea is where we left it was that around housing, around energy, and around sort of park programming, that we would form some staff level offline work groups that would sort of flesh out exactly what the interest is, how tangible it is, if it's on an advisory basis or if there's funding attached to it, and whether or not they're actually going to be showing up in design or having connection with developers. So we identified some concrete next steps to sort of break the problem down by leaving that large group introductory meeting and forming some smaller work groups that will identify exactly how they're going to plug into the project. So we don't have the answer yet, but Mike and Gabe are working on it.
Are the developers aware of these potential resources?
That's a good question. I would say no, not concretely, because we just had this meeting and we're identifying the specific areas of interest, which was intentional. We didn't, early on, we've telegraphed that we have these partners and that we've received funding and that we're acting as a proactive partner to the developer to kind of broker connection points to Met Council, Three Rivers, Hennepin County, and others. But on the specifics of housing, energy, parks, or other things that might emerge, we haven't relayed that to the development teams yet. So if you have ideas about that, since they're in, there's a 6-week period where they're working on their proposals. If you've got ideas about how to communicate that, we're all ears. They are aware, of course, of all the funding sources that are available through those agencies with TBRA, TOD, because that's just the world that they operate in. But maybe not so familiar with the specific partnership that we're building within those different organizations actively right now.
Somehow we just have to,
Well,
go ahead.
Andrew Maxwell?
Somehow we just have to convey to the developers before we get so far into the process that they won't go back and incorporate some of the stuff that we would possibly see.
I see
Manager
Mike's
Miller?
logging on, so
I'll come back to Mike. Just,
okay.
did you have a question first, Dick?
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that it's in our great interest to make sure that all the developers have all the information that we have, so that they can use their creativity and their and try to further their project in the best light, with all the bells and whistles that are available and all the interest. So somebody doesn't, because they weren't informed, is missing out on some critical information. I think the quicker the better we can do that. I think the better off we are. At least make them aware that we had this meeting and we're trying to gather information for them and who to contact, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr. Heenan.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chair White and Manager Miller. These are great questions, and as James noted, Gabe and I are working on these pretty closely. Actually, as recently as yesterday, John Commerce, Chuck Lutz, Gabe, and myself met on this very topic to talk about how we are both mining what funding sources are out there, what the requirements are, what they would what they might contribute towards, and then how are we starting to think about each of those funding sources from a partnership perspective of the city, district, and developers, so we're not competing against one another either. And we certainly are prepared to push information out once we have a little bit more through addendums and other sort of touch points with the developers. So we do want to make them all aware, fairly across the board, so we can post things and push information out once we have a little bit more. Tentatively, what we're working on is John is going to be prepared to start to look into some of these funding sources with our dynamic evaluation model that Gabe and I are working to pull together right now. And we do want to have those very conversations with the developers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Anything else?
Questions?
All right. Well, thanks. That was a great and exciting report about 325. Appreciate that very much. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening.
Go straight home.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good
Go
night.
straight home.
Have a great night, everybody.